Good morning, B Block. As you would have heard from your teachers yesterday, you guys are needing to present your CAT oral speech. And this is based on your ethics research that you need to present. It needs to involve a PowerPoint. And what we're going to spend here is take a look at how you go about structuring your speech. But more importantly, we're going to look at the art of rhetoric, what it means to speak clearly, to speak well, and to speak with passion. Let's start with a fun example. Let's take a look at the amount of facial hair I've had on my face in the past, in the present, and possibly in the future. Your task is you need to convince me which is the best look. Is it firstly this clean, smooth, shaven, very neat, very almost schoolboy-like look? Should we or should I go for that? Perhaps you want to contrast it with the stubble approach, the little bit of beard outgrowth that sort of ties in nicely with the sunglasses and really gives a well-traveled look. Is that perhaps the better approach? How are you going to convince me about that? And perhaps as part of your convincing, you're first going to look at some logical facts, like the fact that the more your beard grows, the more you need to manicure it. So here's an example of me with a manicured look. However, compared to the stubble, it may not look so rugged, but a good logical argument is, there's a lot more upkeep on this look. So if you want to upkeep, go for it, sir. If not, shave it off or let it grow. So then you continue the argument and saying, sir, look here, in the middle of the Fish River Canyon, you had a beard. It really went well. It stopped you from burning in that desert heat. I'm starting to get convinced. Your rhetoric, your speech, your oral is starting to build that up. But perhaps now you want to bring in a different step. And that is something I could relate to and you can relate to. Now you have used logos, you've used logic. Perhaps you want to use something called ethos. You want to identify with me. And you could say, sir, I remember when I was on C Block journey. I've been there. I haven't shaved for a while. I've had that beard grow out and I know exactly what it feels like. Perhaps you even want to address even more so the fact that, Mr. Smith, you need to get some style in your life. And you perhaps need to look at the way I dress in terms of style, in terms of how and where and what you do. You need to get sideburns, sir. Sideburns are so 1920, 1820, 1720, and 2020. Unfortunately, I don't have a photo of me with sideburns. I do of my ancestor. This is Samson Dyer, who started Dyer Island. And he is rocking those sideburns from 1820. So perhaps you want to say, sir, this is the way to do it. And then once you've used some logic to try and argue why I should or shouldn't have a beard, once you spoke about ethos and about style and the ability you yourself have to bring to that, you may want to turn to some emotion. So you could say about the joy that someone looking well-groomed brings, or you can bring in some negative emotion and say, sir, the way your beard is in this photo is absolutely terrifying. Please never do it. We won't be able to learn. We won't be able to concentrate. You're going to scare us and you're going to scare the young kids. Or even worse, you're going to bring up some picture of me or what I look like when I'm 80 and say, sir, look what that beard does to you. Look how it ages you. Look how it destroys you. Who would ever want to be with an old man like that? And you throw those questions using all these rhetorical tools. Once you've got the logic, once you've got the ethos, now you bring in what's called the pathos, the emotion. You try and make me feel as dreadful as possible and therefore manipulate me to following the way that you want to go. And just another quick example, those in my class know I absolutely love coffee. I want to convince you how to drink coffee perfectly. So I'm going to start with some logic about how coffee gives you energy, how coffee comes through, how coffee is fantastic for your heart and for your kidneys and your life. Then I'm going to shift to a bit of ethos to say, I do drink coffee. You guys know I drink coffee. Look how wonderful my life is because I drink coffee. And then I turn to some emotions and I say, there's nothing better than a warm cup of coffee. But even better, there's nothing better than thick cream and coffee. It just makes you feel like you're in heaven. It makes you feel that you can achieve anything you want in life. So, two quick, silly, fun examples about creating and developing a speech. And I'm going to now play a presentation I did earlier this year, but it's very relevant in terms of saying how you actually get rhetoric, how you develop a speech, using those three things, using logos or logic, and obviously that's your ethics research that you're going to bring in, your pathos, how you get the emotions going on that ethical issue, and then the ethos, how you are able to relate personally to that ethical issue. And putting all those three together develops an argument and develops a speech that you can then confidently deliver, and at the same time trust yourself and your argument to be something that's not going to just change minds, but hopefully in some small way start to change the world. So we're going to be looking now at the art of persuading your audience. And what that means in a nutshell is, how can you sell an idea? How can you get people on your side? So what is rhetoric? Well, as I said, Aristotle speaks about it, and he defines rhetoric and, quote, it's the power to see the possible ways of persuading people about a given subject. In essence, that is persuasion. It is trying to get people to follow you, to buy your product, to be where you are. And for you guys, most of you being 13 to 14 years old, you guys are the masters of rhetoric. We always joke, teenagers know about rhetoric because you have to use your language to persuade, perhaps if your housemaster, your teacher, your parents, and your friends to get what you want. So you use rhetoric everywhere. Politicians try to get you to vote for them, but you yourself try to peer pressure your friend to do something silly. Perhaps as an adult trying to get his class to engage in the content of work. Each and every single day you use rhetoric in some form or another. Think quickly how you've used rhetoric this morning. Was it perhaps trying to convince a younger brother or sister to bring you a cup of coffee? Or trying to tell mom that perhaps it's not your turn to make your bed or to wash your dishes? What arguments, what skills have you used that in essence brings that about? So if you're able to understand how to use rhetoric and you know the tools to use, you're going to be able to have that power. So let's take a look at this man, this handsome gentleman. I say that obviously tongue-in-cheek. Mr. Donald J. Trump, who in essence used rhetoric, used it exceptionally well, but perhaps not for the purpose we'd want him to use it for. There's a reason Donald Trump became president in 2016, and a large part of that is because he had massive rallies, and he was able to persuade people to vote for him. He used all these tools of rhetoric we're going to look at. Whether it was good or bad is, in essence, is up for you to decide. But using rhetoric in itself, using the tools, if you look through history from Adolf Hitler to Joseph Stalin, and you look at their speeches, they use these same tools to convince a crowd to do evil stuff. And we see the same with Donald Trump. Even on, some of you may have seen January the 6th, when the Capitol riots happened, when people went across and almost stormed the middle of a Senate session. If you see what Donald Trump was tweeting, if you see what he was saying, you can see how he almost brought about a revolution. And that in contrast for, as I say, one of my heroes, Martin Luther King Jr., who used rhetoric and the power of speech, unlike Trump, I would say, for good. He used it to change a generation, to change a movement, to bring about lasting equality, which we still need to work towards, but definitely use that positively. There's the example of rhetoric being used, of rhetoric going within and beyond and for all aspects. So who uses rhetoric? Well, if you want to communicate. Firstly, you do it through direct persuasion. So this is non-fiction. This is perhaps the product or whatever you're trying to sell. This is basically me, Mr. Smith, saying why coffee is the best. I'm trying to prove to you some facts and bring them about. I could use propaganda, and propaganda is often when we take facts and we twist them slightly to make it's half the truth, but it's definitely there to persuade people and to get people to follow you. And sometimes in the books we read, the author's purpose there, fiction and non-fiction, trying to get an idea. And what it is about going from, if you look at the bottom of that slide, it's going from the listener to the reader or the person who hears into the audience. Anytime you read a book, anytime you watch a show, even some computer or Xbox or PlayStation games that you play, they're trying to convince you about something. And you need to ask the question, what are they convincing you about? So we talk about there being three ways to master rhetoric. The three main ways of mastering rhetoric. That is logos, that is pathos, and that is ethos. And we're going to spend a bit of time looking at these three. And these are the three I want you to take notes on. I want you to learn. I want you to memorize. Logos, think of logic. And that's very much the root of the word. Where does it come from? How do you reason with the facts? I'm going to convince you purely on the facts and where it comes through. Pathos, the passion and empathy that you show. Empathy being the feelings that you create. I'm not going to just persuade you in essence with the facts. I'm also going to appeal to your emotions. And then ethos, that's the idea around ethics and being a credible person. That is when you speak, you need to have the experience to justify what you're doing. Let's take the example of Mr. Smith. Guys in my class know I love coffee. So I've got my coffee. I want to use logos to tell you to drink coffee. Well, firstly, logos, coffee is far better than tea. It contains more nutrients. It's better for your health. There's the facts. I want to use ethos, so the credibility of who I am. I drink coffee. If you've never seen me drinking coffee and yet I'm trying to convince you to drink coffee, you're going to question that. And then the pathos, the emotions. Guys, when you drink coffee, the feelings you get. It really changes your life. It makes you believe you can conquer anything. Don't you guys want to conquer the world? So in doing those three, we get the foundation of all great speeches, whether for good or for evil. So let's zoom in slightly more. Let's look at logos. Take a look at this illustration. Move your head around slightly, go in and out. If you analyze this, and I know this PowerPoint will be available, you'll actually see all these blocks are straight. The only reason it's moving is because the blocks together create this feeling that there's depth to it. You've got to do the same with your arguments around logos. You've got to make sure that you take all the facts, but put them in a way that it creates a wormhole, that it creates a black hole, that the facts themselves are so strong that you're able to follow through with it no matter what. You appeal to people's minds, you look at all sides, but you provide evidence. Another common one or an argument you may have had is the idea of who's the greatest footballer at the moment. Some people would say Messi. Some say Ronaldo. I definitely say it's Timo Werner for Germany and Chelsea. Now you want to bring some stats. Well, how many goals has Messi scored? How many goals has Ronaldo scored? We all know Timo himself doesn't necessarily score, but he creates. So perhaps I bring space about he's run far further than them. Perhaps he's creating and assisting more than them. You're going to counter that with facts around Messi and Ronaldo. But at the end of the day, because I'm arguing, I'm going to make sure the facts suit what I'm trying to do. And I'm going to bring that about. After we've appealed to the mind, though, we need to appeal to the emotions. Sometimes the emotions are counter to facts. You've all been there this past year. Your mom and dad have said to you, just 2 more weeks and you can come home. You don't have to be that homesick. It's not much. You can push through. You know that's the reality up in your head. But within yourself, your emotions don't necessarily weigh up. The feeling of waiting around for another 2 weeks till you go home doesn't correspond to the facts that you've got. So your great persuaders use emotion. They build into that emotion in order to also convince you, to bring about laughter, followed by tears, followed by this meaning to get going and to look at that. So pathos is the emotional appeal. It appeals to your heart. This is not about saying, is Messi or Ronaldo the better player? But this is about talking about when you watch them, you just feel joy. You just feel excitement. Who gets you going the most? Who's the one you want to wake up early excited to see who's going to win the cup? That's the emotional appeal. And then the third one is the idea around ethics and credibility. Credibility, in essence, it means when you speak about something, you have to be known as someone who's able to speak about it. If I had never watched soccer before, if I had no idea what Chelsea was or who a Barcelona is or anything like that, and yet I stand up and I tell you about Messi being the best player, you're going to start to doubt and say, oh, maybe this isn't the best guy for that. So you need to firstly appeal to something that you yourself believe, and you need to be someone that people can trust on this, that you've done the research. I always joke, most probably the worst person to give an anti-smoking message is the person who smokes. Just picture if somebody you know who smokes and they stand up in assembly and you've literally seen them outside smoking, and they walk into assembly and say, boys, smoking is very bad for you. Don't smoke. You're going to start questioning that. You're going to start saying, hang on, where does this guy come from? So ethos appeals firstly to who you are, your ability to identify. But secondly, it's also that you're appealing to what is right. You say, guys, the facts say this and the emotions say this, but at the end of the day, what is right? What is good? Let's look at Martin Luther King again. The facts, he would often start his speech saying, there's racist laws. A black man and a white man cannot sit on the same part of the bus because there's discrimination. He would then appeal to your emotions. Say, how can this be right? How do you feel? But he also had the ethos, the ethics, the credulity. He would say, in essence, I've actually been there. And we know he was often arrested. He was often beaten. He is able to talk because he's saying, I've gone through these ideas. So, logos, ethos, and pathos. Let's go through again. And now I'm using another rhetorical tool, a very common one called repetition. I've said these words most probably 5 to 6 times already, and you can see how I've almost built and structured in the arguments. And now I'm going to show you examples from them while also repeating them. So logos, again, is the appeal for reason and logic. It's the facts to be convinced. And let's take a look at an example. So make sure you always have facts that back up your ideas when writing and speaking. And just a bit of an aside, guys, just typing into Google, who is the greatest soccer player, is not research. Or clicking on the first Google link and saying, oh, this person says this. That's not research. Everyone has an opinion. You've got to actually see, firstly, does that opinion come from anywhere? It's like watching a TikTok video or an Instagram story and saying, well, this is truth because it's on a TikTok video. Could be someone absolutely messing around. So let's say, example, as a teacher, I want you guys to pay attention. So I say, and I do a study, I ask all the teachers at Michael House, and then I can say to you guys, studies show that 9 out of 10 teachers prefer students who participate in class. What that means is I've done the work. I'm able to show you guys that if you participate in class, it's far better for you, and you need to be able to go through. Let's take another example about perhaps you wanting to go and watch a movie this weekend, or you want to go to a place with your parents. You need to show some facts. So say, Mom, please can, maybe you're in Durban, you want to go to a shaka. Mom, please can we go to a shaka this weekend? Your mom's reply, perhaps is first going to be factual. No, it's dangerous because in essence, perhaps we're going to get COVID. You can then go and look at the COVID stats. You can say, hang on, in Durban, there's only been 200 cases, and you can look at the map and see none of those cases are near Ushaka. You can go back to your mom and say, Mom, I know you're worried about COVID, but look at the facts. It's quite hard to argue with facts if you've got the correct facts. Let's take an example around pathos. Pathos, remind yourself what pathos is. Pathos is the appeal towards your emotions. You need to convince your audience in that appeal around how you feel. So let's think of some example. You need people to be able to follow you. You need people to be able to see where you're going. Chances are you learn from the teachers. Think of your best teachers at Michael House or in primary school. It's those teachers who make you feel something. The teachers who speak in the same boring, monotone voice, and they never care about how you're doing, you're not going to learn much from them. But the teacher who one day really gets excited about a subject and about the fact that a math sum works, or perhaps about a metaphor in class, those are the teachers you're going to engage with. And how do we get those emotions? We need to appeal to people's emotions. Look at this slide. Is it anger or love or happiness or sadness or surprise or disapproval or aggressiveness? Anger, admiration. What are you going to do to develop your argument and take it on there? Mom, I want to go to Ushaka. Perhaps the COVID stats are fine, but Mom, I'd feel so happy if you let me go. Mom, I've been feeling so depressed here in my home. Mom, if I could just go outside, it would lighten my heart and my soul. Mom, don't you want me to be happy? By creating those emotions, you can, in essence, manipulate or persuade your mom. And again, the ethos, the appeals to the audience. They must know you are a credible and reliable source. If you keep appealing to your mom to go to Ushaka, but you can't swim, you hate water, it's most probably the wrong argument to be making of where you want to go. And there's many ways to show your expertise in this. Sometimes it's the diction you use, the words you use, it's the sources, it's the appeal to emotion. It's bringing in all those poetic devices we talk about to create a vision of what it means, using your metaphors, your similes, your alliterations, and your assonances. For instance, if I was your English teacher, and if I wrote like this, and this is not because I've got bad handwriting, but imagine if this is how I spelt. You probably wouldn't listen to an English teacher if he wrote like this. If I can't spell and I want to teach you English, or if I can't add and I want to teach you maths, if I walked into class and say, guys, 10 times 10 is equal to 90, and I'm not joking, I'm being serious, you must probably going to seriously question whether I should be teaching maths. Even if I've got the best emotional appeals, the pathos, even if I've got all the facts around why I should teach maths, if I can't add, you're not going to buy into what I'm saying. So that in essence is ethos. If you don't sound like you know what you're talking about, no one will listen. You guys have to back yourselves. You always use that term. But when you're giving a speech, you've got to almost have a slight bit of arrogance that your product or your way or your message is the best. Mom, I need to go to a shock, and you need to have a firmness of conviction there. I'm not going to get COVID. I'm going to feel better, and I'm going to have so much fun swimming. This in the mind turns to then the audience. Once you've got these three, the pathos, the logos, and the ethos, you've also in essence got to look at your audience and who you're speaking towards. You need to know the people and the purpose of your writing or your speaking or what you're trying to do, because the way you approach them is going to be very different. Audience is who you're speaking to. Think of the difference between speaking to Mr. Clark, the rector of Michael House, versus your housemaster, versus an intern in your house, versus your cop, versus the friend in your room. Quickly think about how those change the way you speak to people. This is one of my favorite photos. Why it's one of my favorite photos is this is a photo taken when Hitler was giving a speech. Hitler knew his audience, and his audience knew him. He would say hugely racist, hugely anti-Semitic stuff. What I loved about this photo is there was one man in the audience, and you can see him there in history, who, when everyone else saluted, he chose not to salute. But in terms of audience, Hitler knew who he was speaking to. If you had someone up here speaking to this audience who was very pro-equality, they most probably would be booed off the stage or anything worse. Think of making an argument now about going to Ushaka. You want to go and swim. How are you going to approach it in this audience? These are the audience, just being one of the most famous basketball victories of all time. How are you going to speak to that audience to convince them to go? What words, what emotions, what happiness are you going to use? How would that different versus a rock concert? How would that be different And as you start to develop in the audience and what you're saying and how you're speaking, you quickly pick up these ideas that perhaps it's actually all about trying to manipulate, trying to persuade based on who you're going. So more informal, we use that term, versus formal. Formal is when you obviously say speaking to the rector, probably the easiest to remember. Informal is when you're speaking to the guy who's got his underwear under your bed and you're trying to tell him to stop doing that. So if you're writing to your high school sweetheart, most probably not writing, you're typing up a message to the girl you really like, you're most probably going to start off, maybe it could be like, hey, babe, I love you, or how's it going? Or, hey, sweetheart, I miss you a lot. It's going to be very informal, very chatty. How are you doing? That type of thing. But if you're writing perhaps to your grandparents, how are you going to start it? Dear grandma and grandpa, dear granny and opa. You most probably wouldn't say, how's it, gran? Don't think that audience and the level of your grandparents' age will change the way they speak to you. Again, versus a business letter for a class assignment, or you need to present something to the people you're going to, you want to sell a product to someone, you're not going to stand up and say, dear hiring, you won't stand up and say, how's it? I want to sell you this project. You're going to say, dear hiring official, dear board and management, I would like to present to you what I've done. So your audience is really important, and it changes day in and day out, the way that you speak, the way that you go through. When you're writing lab reports, when you're writing essays, when you're doing, no matter where it comes, you constantly in your mind are already taking the difference between academic, between personal, between informal. I guarantee you not one of you has ever seen the rector run across the quad, given him a hug and said, how's it, Ant? How are you doing? If you did that, I promise you, I'll take you to the tuck shop, I'll buy you a Coke and a burger, if you're brave enough to do that. But you won't, because that's not the way it goes. You're not going to see Kwande and you're not going to say, Kwande, you're looking cool. You'd probably say, afternoon, Kwande. You'd greet him according to the need that you've got. So let's go back as we start to summarize and conclude. And again, notice my repetition of these main ideas. You want to use your logos, you want to use your pathos and your ethos on your audience. So depending on who your argument is, you could use more logic, you could use more pathos, but you must probably going to use all three at the same time. So let's take a look at an example. You're trying to convince your parents for a later curfew. Let's say the curfew, your mom and dad say you can head out to the mall, go and watch a movie, but you need to be back at 9. You know, though, the girl you really like is hanging around to 10, and you'd like just to hang with her a bit longer. So you want to persuade your parents. How are you going to do this? Firstly, you're going to use logic. You're going to use the facts. Mom and dad, the shops are open until 10. We will only be in the mall. We'll make sure we always wear our masks. I'll be with my friends. I'll have my cell phone on. You can call me whenever you want. I'll even enable live tracking so you can constantly see where I am. You're going to use all those logical things to try and convince your parents to allow you to go. But you've also got to perhaps throw in some ethos for your parents. So you're going to start saying, Mom and Dad, it's also, I really feel like an outcast. If I'm not there, I'm really going to feel like I'm going to get bullied. Mom and Dad, and I know this is a common one, everyone else is doing it. Do you want me not to be part of that? Perhaps your parents allow you the later curfew, and you're in a mall and there's a roller coaster there. It's a very cool roller coaster mall, and you want to go on the roller coaster. But your friend doesn't want to go because he's afraid of heights. Now you want to appeal to him. So you can throw in some logic like, come on, this is the safest roller coaster in the country, you won't fall. But more likely, particularly if they're girls, you're going to try and impress her, you're going to use some pathos, some emotion. You're going to be good old-fashioned coward. Oh, come on, you're being a chicken. Quack, 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 quack. Come on, you can do this. And just that little bit of that friend being peer pressured using the emotion. And again, don't use peer pressure unless it's for positivity. But you're going to have some logic, but you're trying to convince them to get on that roller coaster. But again, this is where the ethos comes in with your mom and dad and with your friend. If you've never been on that roller coaster and you refuse to, guys, I really hope that was a helpful presentation. Just really exploring the art of speaking well, the art of getting people to follow you, to believe you, and to understand you. You guys have done some great research on your ethical issue. Now you need to speak passionately with the rhetorical tools around that. You need to speak for 4 to 5 minutes, and there needs to be some similar PowerPoint or visual that accompanies it in the same way in that presentation I did. Don't copy and paste your speech in. You're going to be assessed on the way you incorporate both into your. A reminder, you're adopting the persona of a lecturer, so you're coming in as a professor of whatever your ethical field is. You're presenting it to your fellow grade 12 learners, and your PowerPoint and posters need to back up and engage within your arguments. You're going to look at 3 aspects in your research that you found compelling, and then you're going to highlight the ultimate ethical issues that come through. And finally, you guys need to include the conclusion that shows how these ethics influence Michaelhouse and South Africa. Ultimately, we want your slides to back up your argument, not just to be copied and pasted, but have fun. Really go out to seek to change people's minds, to influence people's minds, and let the art of rhetoric speak through you as you use those tools.